nonpartisan state audit and a study by the conservative legal firm Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, among other analyses, end quote. In addition to that, Time magazine also published a must-read interview with Trump this week, previewing the policies and actions that he would implement in a possible second term. The profile highlights his radical plan to expand the powers of the presidency in order to bypass bureaucratic red tape and other safeguards that could prevent him from enacting some of his most divisive and draconian plans. Those plans include building migrant detention camps and deploying the military at the border and inland. He also said he'd be willing to fire a U.S. attorney who's not willing to carry out his wishes, a break from the traditional of independence normally granted to law enforcement. Trump already tested the limits of that during his first term. He's also considering pardoning hundreds of supporters who have been convicted of January 6th related crimes and has pledged to activate the National Guard at his discretion to help cities combat crime. That's not legal, by the way. Contrary to what some may think, the former president is not an anomaly in American politics. While he may be unmatched in terms of his narcissism, Trumpism itself is not a novel idea. The movement that he ushered in is in line with the Republican Party's Southern strategy, a long-term plan developed in response to the civil rights movement that sought to exploit white Southerners' racial anxieties. It was a plan Richard Nixon leaned into for his political campaigns and his presidency. He used the phrase silent majority to refer to the white Southerners he was trying to court. And his call for law and order was a dog whistle opposing the protests and marches that were common in the 1960s and the early 70s. Ronald Reagan capitalized on those same racial fears when he invoked the false and defamatory trope of the welfare queen, a derogatory term that depicted poor minorities, especially black women, into negative stereotypes. If any of that sounds familiar, it's because Trumpism picks up right where they left off. It's something the former president acknowledged in his Time interview, remarking that he believes, quote, there is a definite anti-white feeling in this country, end quote. The Southern strategy was an overwhelming success for Republicans. It resulted in a major political realignment that saw white Southerners shift from being Democrats to being Republicans, and it transformed the South into a Republican stronghold. It may be an uncomfortable truth, but the GOP succeeded because they tapped into an anti-liberal ideology that has always been a part of America's politics, and it remains true to this day. Joining me now is Norm Ornstein. He's a senior fellow emeritus at the American Enterprise Institute. He's the co-host of the Words Matter podcast, the co-author of the book, One Nation After Trump. Norm, it's good to see you. Thank you for being with us. And we often turn to you when we want to talk about context and history in Congress, but by definition, you've been following it for so long that you understand the context and the history that has occurred in this country in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s as it relates to some of these illiberal pushes that we're seeing now.
Even more, Ali, this goes back to the 1930s. Father Coughlin, who was the Rush Limbaugh of his time, an isolationism, a racism, an anti-Semitism that was infected in the Republican Party, fought off by the mainstream for a long time. But as you note, that began to change in the 1960s. It changed with the Goldwater movement and then with Nixon. And really, Trump is a culmination of that. I have to say, though, that, we're seeing a lot of Republicans now, like Elise Stefanik and Speaker Mike Johnson, decry anti-Semitism. These are the same people who said nothing when Donald Trump feted Nick Fuentes, a Nazi, and Kanye West, an open anti-Semite. And what we've seen this week, this Eric Codalesa interview with Donald Trump, is stunning to me, because most dictators, whether it's Hitler or Sisi or Putin or Erdogan, they don't signal in advance, or Orban, this is what I'm going to do. They try and cushion it and soften it until they're elected. Trump's right out there telling us that he's going to be a vicious dictator. 12 million people or more put in. They call them detention camps. I'd call them concentration camps before trying to remove them. Having women's pregnancies monitored by the state. And he's doing that because basically he knows he can get away with it. Nobody much except you and a few others are paying close attention to it.
This is why this continues to be such an important discussion. It's interesting that you named Sisi and Erdogan and Orban, because none of them will tell you they're dictators. They'll actually tell you they run democracies where elections occur, and they do, but media is controlled, and things like Trump is talking about doing start to happen, and democracy starts to ebb away. In fact, this Time interview that you talk about, it lays out a remarkably alarming picture of a second Trump term. Central to these plans is a push to give more powers to the executive branch. Now, people don't seem to mind that, Norm, when your guy's in the executive branch, but it actually can tend to be anti-democratic.
And we know what some of the plans are, this so-called Schedule F, where you can basically remove career civil servants and replace them with flunkies. And we know that Project 2025, out of the Heritage Foundation, in close connection with the Trump campaign, is building a cadre, an army of Trump loyalists. We also know other things this week, people talking, including his former chief of staff, about how Trump casually would say, with people he didn't like, we could execute them. And, you know, shrugging that off, he didn't really believe it. That's what Bill Barr had said. But we know that he said he will invoke the Insurrection Act, bring out the military to take on protesters. And if that happens, we're going to see bloodshed as well, something he has not shied away from. But most of our media just shrug at this. This is just Donald Trump. And I don't see a lot of full-page, front-page stories on this. Boy, if Joe Biden said even a quarter of this, it would be glaring DEFCON 1 for everybody.
And I'll remind our viewers, this is the A block of our show because we happen to think this is remarkably important. But it becomes difficult, Norm, because people say, why is your hair on fire about this stuff? I don't know. It's a simple thing called democracy. It is one of these things that we do have to get people to understand. You can be as conservative or as liberal as you'd like in this country, and it is worth debating all of those ideas and where you feel minimum wage should be and what you think about universal health care and labor unions. But right now, the discussion is about actual democratic freedoms that once surrendered, become very hard to win back.
And we have got to get the focus on this continuously, because the reality is we lose our democracy if Donald Trump wins. We cannot let this just pass by. We have to have summits on democracy. We have to focus on the reality that in Trump's first term, there were at least a few people like Defense Secretary Mark Esper, to a degree like the Chief of Staff John Kelly, and certainly some others who tried to put at least some limits on what he wanted to do. And Trump has made it clear that he's not going to be Mr. Nice Guy next time around. The people he will bring in are the Steve Millers, the Steve Bannons, the Roger Stones, the Michael Flynns, radical fanatics who will do away with every freedom that we've cherished in this country. And if we treat this as a typical election, two candidates running just to focus on the horse race, which is what I see too much in our mainstream media, then we're going to be facing horrible consequences.
You know, you work for the American Enterprise Institute, which is thought to be a conservative think tank. You work with a lot of conservatives, many of whom we have on our show, by the way.
Yes.
But you wrote a piece for the Washington Post. You wrote it with Thomas Mann in 2012. And the piece was titled, "Let's Just Say It, the Republicans Are the Problem," in which you called the GOP, and I'm quoting here, an insurgent outlier in American politics. In 2012. And yet today, that could have been written yesterday. The Republican Party right now is an insurgent outlier in American politics, although one that is potentially set to take power again in Congress and in the White House.
You know, Ali, over more than 5 decades, I worked with literally hundreds of Republicans in Congress and in the executive branch, people who were in many cases significantly more conservative than I, but who cared about the country, wanted to solve problems, believed in institutions, believed in the rule of law. That began to slip away before Donald Trump. He was an accelerant of this process. I get, challenged sometimes by Republicans, especially in office, that I want to destroy the Republican Party. I want to save a party that should be a problem-solving party. But it has gone so far from its roots. And the troubling reality is that even without Trump, you look at not just the Freedom Caucus people in Congress. By the way, the Citadel soiling itself by having Nancy Mace, who is one of the worst Trumpists, as its commencement speaker. But you look at a party now and look at the next generation, the people now in the school boards and the state legislatures and the party positions. They make the Freedom Caucus people look mild by comparison. It's a long-term project, if we can save our democracy in November, to try and restore a legitimate two-party system. We can't operate with one party and one cult.
I know that there are people, watching this who would say, fine, if the Republican Party burns itself to the ground. It's not healthy to not have two competitive parties discussing matters of great import to everybody in the country on a regular basis. Norm, thanks as always, my friend. I appreciate it. Norm is a senior fellow emeritus at the American Enterprise Institute. He's the co-host of the Words Matter podcast and is the author of One Nation After Trump. Coming up, Florida's 6-week abortion ban has officially gone into effect this week, but according to our next guest, it's only the beginning of a dangerous new front in the war on women's health. And then 54 years ago today, National Guardsmen fired gunshots into a crowd of student protesters at Kent State. They killed 4, they wounded 9. Looking back and learning from that dark part of our history. Plus, today's Velshi Band Book Club feature is a remarkable study in nuanced characters and multi-layered storytelling. It's also painfully true. I'm talking about Jeanette Wall's stirring memoir, The Glass Castle. Do not miss today's meeting of the Velshi Band Book Club.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, with your home, auto, boat, and RV all bundled with Progressive, you've got the peace of mind to really wander.
Yeah, I just hope it stays this way. Once word gets out about these places, they tend to...
Are you done?
And there it is.
Well, at least your vehicles are protected. Let's hit the road.
Hey, fam. I am just at this beautiful lake that I just discovered, practicing gratitude, manifesting abundance.
This is Rochelle, who gives you a shot. Rebecca is there when you feel not so hot. This is Larissa, who's feeling blown up. And this here is Winnie, who zhuzhed up their cup. This is Victoria, helping women stay healthy. These are your kids, snacking snacks made with veggies. And Maddie can help you find your new favorite color. And Kyle helps find meds for under $10. Whoever you are, wherever, whenever. At CVS, healthier happens together.
Rich, indulgent chocolate with a luscious caramel filling. Discover Ghirardelli caramel squares in a bag and a bar. Makes life a bite better.
I used to smoke. I thought it'd help relieve my stress. But then I had open heart surgery. My tip is find healthy ways to cope with stress, because open heart surgery is pretty stressful.
You can quit. For free help, text QUIT now to 333-888.
Can the flavor of a slow-cooked smoked sausage be so gloriously delicious that the sight of it sizzling makes your taste buds weep?
If it's Hillshire Farm. Oh, hell yeah.
Floating away in perfect stillness.
Dylan Purple by Versace.